Howdy folks, Sapper here, aka Sean, and I am bringing you the final turn of Next War Poland Strategic Surprise Scenario. I think I'm going to have to call it in turn 10. I'm kind of glad I did go to turn 10, rather than just end it at turn 9, because the things that happened during turn 10 pretty much sealed the deal. It made it kind of obvious that the Russians will not be able to advance any farther. And in fact, if you look at, you got that arrow there. So basically the Soviets are doing retreats, or if it was the U.S. Army, it would be called retrograde operations, right? Because the U.S. Army doesn't retreat. So you have to do what's called retrograde operations. So basically what made the difference was this turn being a clear turn, and the fact that the U.S. and NATO air forces were able to take out, I don't remember exactly where it was, but the headquarters. So there was that Russian headquarters that was here. And then I want to say that was that mobile supply unit that was right there. And it basically put all these units right here, it put them in an out of supply status. And I incorrectly stated that out of supply units cannot attack. That's not true. I did look it up in the rules. And an out of supply unit is their attack factors are reduced by half. Movement factors are reduced by half. And let me just double check and make sure. Its attack and movement ratings are halved, and efficiency rating is reduced by 1. So, obviously it doesn't make a lot of sense to attack when your attack ratings are reduced by half and your efficiency rating is reduced by 1. That's, that can be a pretty big deal. So I could have left the units that were in these hexes, I could have left them there. And, the Allies, they weren't really in danger. There's not a whole lot of Allied presence right down here, although there is a lot of stuff coming in from here. So you got a divisional headquarters and a brigade there. You got this weak battalion of Jaegers here. It's not that big of a deal. Wouldn't have made a big difference. But you also have a good mechanized brigade here. And then off the map, you've got some smaller Italian and Netherlands units. On the strategic display, you've got elements of the 4th Infantry Division. So it looks like we got a headquarters brigade and an aviation brigade getting ready to come on the map. We've got several more aviation brigades that could come on the map. So they could have stayed. The Russians could have stayed here, but they would be giving up, those units would eventually, they wouldn't be in supply. There's no way I could keep them in supply. So they would have just been, it would have been a battle of attrition. They would have eventually been lost, and that's victory points lost. There's only, I think, this is the only victory point location in this area that they were giving up, or actually haven't given up yet. But so that's only 2 victory points for that town. So I chose to move them back. This situation here isn't quite the same. There's a lot of strikes. There's an out of supply unit here, but you've got this massive units right here. You got a French division with 2 brigades. You've got 2 headquarters and a brigade. You've got the 2nd ACR. You've got a couple, it looks like, a couple German brigades there. So you've got a lot of force that could have either pivoted to the right or gone up north. And this up here is kind of a mess too. So it's a losing proposal for the Russians to stay in place. You're losing victory points every time you lose a brigade. If you want to try to support any of those brigades with air power, I mean, the Allies clearly have air superiority, or supremacy actually. So they have air supremacy, so every time you lose an air unit, that's giving up victory points. So you can stay in place and give up victory points, or you can retreat and the towns and cities that you captured for victory points would be recaptured, so you'd lose victory points that way. Either way, you're losing victory points if you stay in place or if you retreat. So you got to think, if this was a real combat, and I kind of alluded to it in a previous video, you know, Russia has to think about long term. What are the after effects of a real war like this? Okay, so we can remain in place and just deplete our armies and just leave us vulnerable in the future, right? So what sense is it to deplete our armies any more than they already are and be unable to defend ourselves as a nation? It's not like the United States is going to invade Russia. I don't think it's not really a realistic scenario. But there are other bad actors out there. I mean, you got China sitting right on their border. Is China really going to do that? Probably not. But, you know, you would cease to exist as a superpower in real life if you stay in place and just, you know, throw units and just let them get slaughtered. So that's kind of the way I thought about it. So you've got all these retreats. You get the retreat here and here and here. So that's kind of the reason I decided to just kind of call it, you know. The strategic map, I'm not going to show that just because it doesn't look any different than it did at the end of the last video. So if you want to see what that looks like, it pretty much looks the same. Just go back and look at the last video again. Give me some more views so I can monetize these videos and make lots of money, quit my day job. Just kidding, that's not going to happen. So let's see, now that that's over with, now I can kind of wrote some notes down and just want to kind of discuss some things, some of my thoughts on the system, and some lessons learned from playing this game. And then I've got a couple nitpicks, right? You know, everybody's always got nitpicks or whatever. So thoughts on the system, thoughts on this particular game, love it. I have all the Next War games. I have the supplement. I've got Next War Vietnam on pre-order. I've got Supplement 2 on pre-order. So I really love this system. I love the future conflict, you know, potential conflict type stuff. It's a system that I like. I like the breakdown of how the units are organized and you know, basically division and brigade. You do have other larger units, but you know, you've got it's at the brigade level, which I like. And of course, another reason I like it is because, you know, I was in the Army, and there are units in this game that I was in. So, you know, it's one of those, you know, it's got that personal touch to me anyway, because I was in some of these units in the Army. So I get to see them move around on the map and all that kind of stuff. So the scale is great. The depictions of the units are great. I really like that, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else they have after Next War Vietnam. I would love to see this continue to expand to represent to where you have more of the world's armies represented in the game, modeled in the game. So as the series has gone on, I have seen an extension of U.S. forces, right? So like when Next War Korea came out, it had, I don't, because I'm not looking at it, I don't have the box open to see, but it had whatever divisions represented, U.S. divisions. And so with each game added to the system, we have seen more of the U.S. divisions added for play in the game. Like, for example, I think Next War Taiwan, or it's Next War India Pakistan, has the 10th Mountain Division in it. So the 10th Mountain Division is not, there are no chits in Next War Poland for the 10th Mountain, but they have them in, I want to say India Pakistan. So if you wanted to play with 10th Mountain, you could integrate them into this game if you wanted to. All right, so I like that. So you have the major divisions in the United States Army. So you got, you know, 1st Armor, 1st Infantry, 2nd Infantry, 3rd Infantry, 4th Infantry. You've got the 82nd, the 101st, 10th Mountain, 25th Infantry Division, which was the unit that I was in, one of the last units I was in the Army. So you've got those, and there's probably some that I'm missing. But then you've also seen the other smaller nations. They have units that are getting updated. Like in Next War Korea, there was only a couple of chits for UK and the Commonwealth, but in this game you see more. So, and I'd like to see that progression with not just NATO and allied countries, but with other countries like Russia and China and, you know, things of that nature. So I really like that, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. I'd like to see more conflicts in different areas. Like, so it's, if you look on the GMT website, they talk about Next War Vietnam, where you could potentially do a Next War Korea, Next War Taiwan, Next War Vietnam combo game and like do the whole Third World War in the Pacific. I would like to see that bleed over into Europe. I'd like to see some stuff in the Middle East, although it would be a little bit harder because they don't fight conventional warfare like, you know, on like this. You know, it's more the militias and the terrorist organizations and just ad hoc groups. They don't have organized military structures. But Middle East would be really cool. Let's see some of that. Africa would be great. Central and South America. I'd like to see this system expand to where you could pop open a box and pull pieces from this and that and like fight a battle anywhere in the world. That would be awesome. So is that realistic? Probably not. But hopefully Next War Vietnam is not the last game in the system. So let's go over some lessons learned from me playing this game. And each one of them plays a little bit different. So on the NATO side, so I have, so these white cubes, so you got a white cube here, you got a white cube there. Can you see that one? No, there's one just off the map right there. And then you've got these two in Warsaw. Those, so I looked up in the initial setup. So those represent those white cubes. And then you can see that one just over there. So the white cubes represent starting positions for Polish brigades. And something that I figured out a little bit too late was that, so you can blow bridges using air power, but it's not as effective as if you have a unit, like say for example, you have a unit right here. Their die roll is a little bit more favorable for success as far as blowing up a bridge. So blowing up bridges would have been a better way to slow down the Russian advance. And now I started blowing up bridges here later in the game where they were almost, you know, ready to overrun everything. And then you got some that are blown up here outside of Warsaw. So I did that later on in the game, but I would have done that sooner if I could go back and do it all over again. I'd start blowing up those bridges a little bit sooner. And these units that start on the map would have blown up started doing retrograde operations and blowing up bridges as they move to the west. So I would have started doing that. I also would have started doing things to affect Russian supply. Targeting mobile supply units, targeting headquarters, which is a little bit harder for the headquarters. So Soviet supply is from an urban, and there's only one urban place to trace supply for the Soviets, and that is Kaliningrad. And then, of course, you can also trace to a map edge if there's not an urban. So you've got these places, but then, of course, you're shortening your supply routes. Belarus is the same way. They don't have any urban locations to trace supply to, so they have to trace supply to the eastern map edge. So targeting roads and highways with interdiction is a way to do it. Now, interdiction it's another one of those things where the die rolls aren't really favorable, so it's very hard to interdict. But that's something I probably should have started doing to affect supply. So targeting mobile supply units and attempting to interdict would have been a way to interrupt supply. So, like for example, when you trace supply from here, an MSU has to be in supply, but it can extend supply another 4 motorized movement points. So obviously, if you're along a road, you get more bang for your buck as far as motorized movement. So, and then headquarters extend that supply another 4 hexes. So if you have your mobile supply unit to the max it can be on this road, and then it extends that 4, they throw supply another 4 motorized hexes, and then you got your headquarters, which can extend that another 4. So mobile supply units and headquarters are pretty important as far as supply purposes go. So I would have started tinkering a little bit more with, let's figure out how we can shut down Soviet supplies. And looking at interdiction. So on the Russian side of the house, NATO air power. Man, I probably would have started targeting air bases, airfields, air bases, and installations a lot more. Because once that air power started ratcheting up in the later turns where you're drawing, let's see, what are we looking at? So NATO gets 3, after turn 4, they're getting 3 random air unit draws per turn. So you're getting 3 additional air units every turn after turn 4, it's ridiculous. And that's just NATO. We're not talking about what U.S. reinforcements are coming in. And that varies per turn, but it looks like, let's see, so in turn 2, you're getting 2 Air Force random draws. Turn 3, we're getting 3 more aircraft. Turn 4, we're getting 2 aircraft. Turn 6, we're getting 3 aircraft. So you can see you're getting 4 to 5 new aircraft every turn. So the Russians really need to start targeting airfields and installations on here, as well as the NATO holding boxes on the strategic display. Because that, when you destroy one of those or even damage one of them, it affects the air units that are available that turn. So the Russians need to do that. And also the S-400s, you can see one here on the map. There's so much going on in this game, you forget things, right? Or you neglect certain aspects of the game that don't seem to like have a humongous impact or you're not familiar with. So I definitely need to pay attention to the S-400s as far as the anti-aircraft shield that they provide over this area. When you take over the island of Gotland, you have the option of putting an S-400 there, which further extends the anti-aircraft bubble over Russian units. So I should have done that a little bit more. But next time we'll see what happens and if I can pay attention to that. And then, so, I mean, those are some of the big lessons that I learned. So for NATO, halt Russian movement, all right, by blowing bridges and affecting supply. For Russia, man, you got to get control of that air power, man. Like, do what you can to wreak havoc on the air power for NATO, because it made a humongous difference, especially on this display on this last turn. I mean, the air power was ridiculous. And those strikes are what took out the MSU that was there and that headquarters that was down in this area. So now, let me see, we'll do some of my nitpicks. let's see if we can. All right, so one of my nitpicks, I only really have two that I can think of right now. I tried to write them down as I thought about them, and these are just nitpicks. I mean, the game is good. The effectiveness of strikes and interdiction. It seems to me that the CRT for those things is, I don't know. It's not as favorable as it could be, I think. I mean, air power can really make a humongous difference. And I don't know if they made it that way to make the game playable, right? Because if everything was just completely wiped out by air power, then, you know, would it be a fun game? I don't know. I don't know if it's that way by design, or that's the way they think that the designers think that actual air power and all that works. I mean, we've got, everybody's seen videos from 1990s, the first Gulf War, where we were firing missiles through windows. And that was in the 90s. That's 20 years ago. So the technology has greatly improved. So we are capable of doing some amazing stuff. Like, you know, we can put if we could put it through the window of a house in the 90s, what can we do now? So we can really, especially with all the UAVs and everything else. So that's one of my nitpicks as far as the strikes and interdiction. And then, so I originally had on there, like, the hex size is too small, which, I mean, if you look at it, you've got, let's put this. All right, so I mean that hex is big. I mean, you can rotate the piece pretty easy. Facing doesn't matter in this game. Well, it does for headquarters and helicopters, but it's just to show that you've used it or whatever. But otherwise, it doesn't really matter what way something faces. But and there are stacking limits, you know. So most hexes are going to have, you know, two things in it, right? Because the stacking limit for a hex is 4 stacking points. So, you know, that one is 2 stacking points, and this one is 2 stacking points. So that's the most you can have in there without adversely affecting, you know, the what's going on in the hex as far as die roll modifiers and efficiency and all that kind of stuff. So for there, it's not that big of a deal. But then you start getting into locations where you've got a bunch of stuff going on right here. So it can get pretty crazy. So here in this hex, and I even covered it before, you can't. Those Marines couldn't have landed there, but I wasn't going to undo everything. But let's just say that there was a port there. Then those Marines could have landed there. Well, Marines are half a stacking point. So, and now you throw in a beachhead, which increases the stacking limit, I think, to 6. So if you put all these things in there, so now we've got a control marker, we've got a beachhead marker, we've got 1 stacking point, 2 stacking points, 3 stacking points, 4 stacking points, 4.5 stacking points. All right. Oh, now the amphibious ship is also considered to be in that same hex. Oh, there's 2 headquarters in there, by the way. There's detection markers on them, on each headquarters. Oh, and some of these units have taken strikes. So as you can see, it's getting pretty ridiculous in that hex. Now, this is obviously not a normal case, right? So Marines are usually the exception to the rule because they're a half a stacking point. Okay, so, you know, normally you're not going to have that much stuff in one hex. But then you start moving things around, and it's the status effects are what make things a little bit harder. So you've got out of supply, you've got strikes, you've got targeting markers that you can put on things. You've got detection markers that you can put on things. What else could we possibly throw in there? Oh, if there's an installation in the hex and it happens to be destroyed, you could throw a destroyed marker in there. Oh yeah, here's a good one. We decided to put a bridge in the hex. We had to bridge across the river. So it can get ridiculous. It's possible to get pretty ridiculous. Again, these are situations that don't happen very often. But so I don't know. I think the hexes are fine. The hex size is decent, but the status effects, I don't know. Is there a better way to try and track that stuff? So I don't know. I don't know if there's a good answer to that. If the hex was a little bit larger and maybe they did something to where it wasn't a chit, it was something else to represent status effects. I don't know. Again, take it with a grain of salt. It's just a nitpick. I like the system. So, and then one last thing that would just make this I would really love it if they did something like this. Let's look here. I'll get these guys on here. So these are chits from another game. It's another GMT game. All right, let's get right down in there. All right. Okay, so if you look at those are chits from, what the heck game is it? Normandy 44? Yeah, Normandy 44. So the thing that I love about these chits, and I wish they would do that with this game, is you get the little unit patch or the unit insignia in the corners of these chits. And I love that. I love it. You can tell at a glance exactly what unit, what division that's from. So you got the 101st right here. You got the 82nd Airborne right there. Now, of course, I'm not familiar with German or British units, but, from an American perspective, and I'm sure a UK guy that's playing Next War Poland or a UK guy that's playing Normandy 44 would recognize that in a heartbeat. Or they recognize that in a heartbeat. Oh, I know. If they were in the military or they're a military buff. So I love that. Where are we at? So there's our Next War Poland counterparts, right? So you could squeeze that unit patch or that unit insignia right there in the top right corner. And I love the headquarters too. So there's a headquarters from Normandy 44 that's got the little bit bigger insignia in the center. And you could do that right there. I mean, you could easily do that right there. So yeah, I mean, Next War Poland does a good job. So all 101st units have the dark green with the light green background. So, those are 101st. And of course, it's also written up there. But when your eyes get tired, the light's a little bit lower. I can see that a little bit better than I can see a bunch of numbers, because all these numbers start to look alike after a while. So again, that's a nitpick. I would love it if they did something like that, with the insignias. So anyway, I think that's about it. Those are my nitpicks. Again, I think the system is great, and GMT, and let's see who did the so games. Oh, Mitchell Land. I should have remembered that, because him and I have we exchanged some emails on Board Game Geek a couple times, and then so the game design is Mitchell Land and system design is Gene Billingsley. So don't take my nitpicks as I hate your product, because I love it, but could we make it better? Yeah, that's just my opinion on one of the small things that we could do to make it better. Anyway, I enjoyed playing the game. I'm going to have to think about what I'm going to play next. And everybody that has been watching this and following it, hey, thank you very much. And we'll see you with the next game that I get on the table. Until then, deuces.